Greetings, everyone. How you doing? This is Joe Driscoll here with John Mannion. John, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me on, Joe. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it, and I did watch your show on Tuesday with Assemblywoman Hunter, and that was very informative and entertaining. And it's great to be with somebody who's going to make sure that this is fun and entertaining. It's not just going to be a grind.
Yeah, my catchphrase has been trying to bring the party back to the party. So that's my standard go-to. So this is Salt City Grind. For those of you who haven't watched before, I launched a new podcast. Tuesday was my first episode with Assemblywoman Pamela Hunter. We had a great conversation. That's up on YouTube, and you can find it on my Facebook pages as well. We're going to keep this going. Next week, I just confirmed we're going to have Alameen Mohammed from We Rise Above the Streets on Tuesday, and Jared Shepard from Center State CEO. He does data analysis, economic analysis, and a lot of other things for Center State CEO. So he'll be talking about the economy during the crisis, post-crisis, and his kind of analysis. So that'll be next week on Tuesday and Thursday. But today we have my friend John Mannion, who ran for state senate last cycle about 2 years ago, and came within a few inches. It was a great, you ran a really great race. And we're gonna chat to him today about everything that's going on. John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us your background, where you're from, what made you run for office in the first place, and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe. Well, I was born in Central New York. I was born on Tipperary Hill. I've lived here my entire life. And, my parents did not have a lot. My father worked on the railroad. Many people out there have heard that story, that he lost his father at a young age. My grandfather and grandmother on his side were immigrants. My grandfather came here and fought in World War I. Got a job at Franklin Auto after the war, brought my grandmother over, and they had a great life. They had the American dream, as you would call it, right here in Central New York, and a lot of great jobs provided for immigrants and people already here. We watched this area grow tremendously. My father did lose his father at a young age, and he dropped out of school, went to work right away. He worked for the New York Central Railroad and then Penn Central, which became Conrail. My mother raised us, but then also worked afterwards for New York Telephone. So anyway, I grew up in a 900 square foot mansion on Tipperary Hill, right on Avery Ave, on a very busy street. But I wouldn't have it any other way. We had a lot of great community organizations and a lot of friends, a lot of people who dedicated a lot of time that were definitely impactful on my life, and I'm happy that those folks were there and those organizations were there for me, and it led to great success in my family. I feel like I am a success story. I've done something I love, which is teach. 27 years in a variety of different places, at CBA, at Nottingham, and then at West Genesee. My wife also grew up in the area. She came from a similar family. Her father was a truck driver, and her mother taught in the city school district. Again, Syracuse, New York, Central New York provided a great place for us to grow. We met each other. We live here. We're both teachers. We both teach in the West Genesee Central School District, and we both previously taught in the city school district. And, our kids attend West Hill School, and we've found that school district to be an excellent one and provide a great education for our kids. So as far as why did I choose to run? How did I get to the point from being a biology teacher to where I'm running for state senate? And my wife would say to me, because she knew I was interested in politics, would you ever run for something? And, maybe the logical move is to run for town board or run for school board. I said, when John DeFrancisco retires, I want to run for that spot. And this was after I had already taken on an advocacy role with the teachers. So I was frustrated with changes in public education. We could go into detail on that, but we probably would take up the whole hour, as it relates to fair funding, as it relates to testing, as it relates to curriculum changes, and really the big money effort that was going to try to transform education that we just have seen recently kind of rear its ugly head and peek into it again. I was very frustrated with that. I did not want anybody else to be the voice in pushing back on that. And as a result, I ran for and won without much experience there either, for the position of president of the West Genesee Teachers Association. And I hope that after I have taken on that position, that I have been true to my word as far as being transparent with my members, as being a strong advocate for them, and being very responsive and easily accessible to them. And I hope that I've been that. In doing that, we've seen other changes occur in and outside of education. I was frustrated with some of those things. I felt like I needed to, for my own benefit, become a stronger voice. And, you know, I was frustrated with public officials being indicted. I was frustrated with public dollars being misspent, honestly. And I felt like I, as a common person who was looking at it from the outside, could make a positive change. Really, more than anything, though, Joe, I've been a teacher for a generation, so I think I connect with people your age. I think I understand where they're coming from a little better. These people who are going to, if they're not already, they're going to become leaders in our community, and where they're coming from. And really, the final straw for me, like a lot of people, was not even what has happened after 2016. It was the presidential campaign of 2016. I have children who at that time were between the ages of 11 and 16. They may not have been paying attention to a a high profile political campaign ever in their lives. And this was the one that they watched. It was never that way. It was never that bad. And it shouldn't be that way. And as a result, I hope in my pursuit for elected office, I stay true to myself and true to my oath, that I keep it positive while not being any less of an advocate on the issues that I'm passionate about, but that making sure that we don't get into the finger pointing and the party politics and the politicalization of issues and the inflammatory language that's used, that really I find incredibly destructive for all of us. Not destructive for politics or how legislatures function. It's just pure destructive. And the children of this country, who I believe I'm closely connected to in our community, should not see this as normal. And this is, I use this line, and I don't know if it resonates or not with people, but you only know what you know. And this is all they know. They didn't see the statespeople who led,
Right.
who led with the best interest of not just the people of their community, but the future of their community. And the destructive rhetoric that's out there is a contributing factor to really, tearing us apart and leaving us in an awful position when we are facing something like this, a global pandemic, and we can't get out of our own way in some ways because the negative political nature has embedded us in a position that we can't get out of. So anyway, that is a long answer for you, but it is really my answer as to why I did it. And in my advocacy for teachers, I'm not just a teacher. I'm not just a science teacher of 27 years. I negotiate contracts. I go through the grievance process. I believe I have enough of a background when it comes to contracts and negotiation and maintaining relationships and the legal aspects of doing that I think I would make a good legislator.
That's great, John. And don't feel bad about long form answers. That's what, that's why I chose to do an hour and a half format where we could really, a lot of times when you're on the political trail, I've dealt with it as well. You try to get, 40-second answers or minute-long answers, and to really get a sense of issues and nuance and to get in real conversations, you need to stretch out a little bit. So I think that's it. And I 100% relate to your sentiment about, I'd be lying. I've tried not to, my formula for Trump has been to try to not engage and to just focus on doing what I'm here to do for the people. Just
Right.
be a representative, engage, talk about potholes, talk about everything. But I'd be lying if I said that, that same sentiment wasn't a lot of what drove me to want to run for office as well, to say, let's elevate the discourse here. I'm just an average person as well. Before I ran for office, I was, a musician by trade, even, arguably less, qualified than most professions. But that same thing that I felt that, I had the skill set and I could, help elevate the conversation. So tell us a little bit about the 50th district geographically. For those that, I always try to, whenever I'm getting into political conversations, I try to remember musician Joe, who wasn't in the weeds on politics and didn't know where the districts are. So for people that are watching that don't know what the 50th Senate district is, state Senate district is, why don't you tell us what the area is regionally and some of the history of the 50th district?
Sure. I can, there's some share screen options here, but I can't access that and I'm going to avoid it. But it is a very gerrymandered district, and we should start in the city of Syracuse, I think. So the majority of the city of Syracuse is in the 53rd, which Rachel May is the Senate representative. My area, if I can call it that, in the 50th district, comprises the north side. I would say that if you are entering from like Onondaga Lake and you come down right to almost Clinton Square, you come in from that direction, so you're not grabbing a very highly populated area. You're looking at the regional market. You're looking at Destiny USA. You're looking at the ballpark, but you're grabbing that area, and then pretty much from the center of downtown Syracuse, you're going up James Street, and neighborhoods to your left are in the district. So it comprises about, by area, maybe 1/6 of the city. I think population-wise, it comprises about 1/8 of the city. And I do have a visual now. So I have an assistant here that was helping me that tends to be more popular than I am out on the political circuit. But anyway, she's making tacos. And I do, so here it is, okay?
Yeah.
Here's the 50th district. If this is the worst social media can get, then I'm glad I'm a part of it. But right there
Take it up to a new low, John. This is
there
great.
You go. There is the north side of the city. And as you can see, if you go from the north side, you go over to the eastern suburbs of DeWitt and Manlius. And the only way to get there is to go through the town of Onondaga. You also have the northern suburbs of Clay, Lysander, Van Buren to the northwest, and then Camillus, Marcellus, Skaneateles, Elbridge, Spafford, Atisco. Does not include in Onondaga County, Cicero or Salina, or the southeastern towns. And then also you go all the way over to Cayuga County over here, and a large part of the city of Auburn. So how did it get that way? It got that way because, there was really too much influence from standing legislators on those maps. And when you look at a map like that, in my opinion, it has nothing to do or little to do with representing the people of that area. It has everything to do with re-election, and that's why maps look that way. So I was born on Tipperary Hill, as I said, in the city of Syracuse. That used to be in the 50th Senate District. Over time, with the redraws, less and less of the city was included, and as a result, we're left with this map. So I'm proud to hopefully represent all of those areas. As I said, I've been here my whole life. I know those areas very well. I have friends, in all of those towns. And I think the good thing about running twice is that I had the opportunity to get out there, learn the issues, learn the area. And now I'm back at it again. So, the 50th district right now, not to go down this road with it, but currently the people in those towns don't have a representative in the state Senate. And in a time where the budget is dynamic and changes will come quarterly, there is going to need to be a voice that says, what about us? And right now, for the 300,000 people of the 50th district, they don't have that voice. And it's no one was hoping for a situation like this. Of course, not having a representative there would not be a good thing under any circumstances, but under these circumstances, honestly, it could be catastrophic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Sean. I'm also going to check our comments here to see what other people have been saying. So the format of this podcast, we often take questions from people. So my friend Jared Shepard, who's going to be my guest next Thursday, had a couple of questions. What are your thoughts about other streams of revenue for New York State? We do have the issue that taxes are high. A lot of conservatives rightfully push back often that the tax rates are high in New York. We're looking at, Assemblywoman Hunter was on Tuesday talking a lot about the $13 billion deficit that the state is facing. So it's obvious that we can't merely tax our way out of this. So what are your thoughts on different revenue streams and potentials, and what kind of ideas would you support and be open to?
Well, there are no easy answers here. And when I hear on a national level the criticism of the high taxes of New York State, I believe that we have services here in many areas and not everywhere, but tremendous services that didn't just happen by accident. We didn't have or don't have the best education system in the country, public education system. And again, there's great disparity within it. By not having high expectations and hiring great people and drawing them to the field. Same thing goes for being the Empire State, for the systems that were put in place to make sure that quality services were provided. That being said, we're a high-tax state, and I think you have to apply logic to this. And for me, the logic is that it's not just increased revenue. It is also, I'm going to talk briefly about the fact that I did mention things like public funds that were misspent and went to projects that didn't come through on the number of jobs that they promised. There has to be greater scrutiny in that area, and I do believe that there is going forward because of the lawsuits that occurred and because of the indictments that occurred, but it never should have got to that. So I do think we have to be careful about how we spend public dollars. I'm sure there is some waste in the system, other places that we have to look at. But as far as new revenue goes, we just had this federal tax cut that occurred, and that hurts our state. It hurts us. It hurts us, and we can talk about if we do implement a tax on the ultra wealthy, that it will drive them away. But the federal tax change that just occurred is driving people away because they can't take those deductions on local taxes and they can't take them on the mortgage to the extent that they did. So that doesn't solve our problem. But I would say that I do think we have to look at the tax code, not to punish wealth, but for the ultra wealthy, for the very wealthy. I think there has to be, we have to look at that. I think just from a visceral standpoint, people aren't real comfortable with that because I think some of us always think, I might be one of those people one day. I do think that you're going to see also the legalization of marijuana and the taxation of marijuana. But again, to stop these short-term budget gaps, that's not going to do anything. I do think the reality is that marijuana will be legalized in the state and it will be taxed, and that will be helpful to a degree. And I also think with the mobile sports betting, I think that's going to be on the table and an additional source of revenue. Again, I think we need a long-term plan. We can't drive people out of the state, but I do think there's room for increased revenue sources. And from listening to what our current representatives are saying in Albany and some of the calls that I've been on, that I think the legislators, some of them anyway, are more receptive to that. And but it is a balance. It's a delicate balance, and it's not an easy one. If it was easy, we would have had it solved by now.
Right.
Yeah.
So someone mentioned, we were talking, when you and I were getting the stream ready about, a lot of people, again, I like to always address the podcast to those and in these conversations to those that perhaps aren't as in the weeds. So can you talk about the dynamics of minority majority
Sure.
in the state Senate, how that's relevant? What the dynamic is, what the dynamic was in the past, what the dynamic is now, and how, you as a Democrat running for this seat, how it's relevant.
Absolutely. So when I ran in 2018, the Republicans were in the majority and very, very narrow majority. And I think when I would go around and talk to people trying to sell myself and sell the issues that were important to me, I would talk about it's likely that the Democrats are going to take over the Senate majority. And they did. They did. And I was very close. I was almost a member of that majority. It used to be a 32-31 split. After the 2018 election, it became a 40-23 split, 40 Democrats in the majority. And, John DeFrancisco was a powerful and well-respected senator. He was in the majority. And his experience and the committee positions that he held allowed him to bring an awful lot back to central New York. Now we sit in a different dynamic, and the different dynamic is that you can hear the talk about it's not good to have one party rule. One party rule, you can call it whatever you want, but right now the Democrats are overwhelmingly in the majority. We have a number of Republican incumbent senators. I think we might be up to 8, including Jim Seward, including Joe Robach. I could go across the state that are in very competitive districts, and they have retired. They're not running in 2020 in November. And as a result, not that I'm here to talk about political dynamics or numbers, but just the reality is it's going to be very difficult for the Republicans to regain it, and very unlikely. And I am actually being kind of kind when I say that. So this is a time with a dynamic budget in New York State with budget deficits. You have got to have somebody in the room driving legislation, forming legislation in that majority conference. I have a good relationship with other upstate senators that are in the Democratic conference, including Tim Kennedy, Rachel May, Neil Breslin, all right, and some senators in the Hudson Valley. And the phrasing that people against me would like to use is it's all about New York City. We hear that all the time. I'm an upstate kid. I grew up here my whole life. I get it. But you know what? We're a big state. We're a diverse state.
Right.
And right now, if you want help bringing things back to central New York and holding on to what we have, because we are in a crisis here. We all know we are. You got to have somebody in the majority. And I've talked to Rachel May about it, and you would be surprised that sometimes as this legislation is going forward or about to hit the floor, you need an upstate voice to say, this is actually how it's going to impact the people of central New York. It's how it's going to impact the people in Beeville or the North Side or the city of Auburn or Brutus. This is how it's going to affect us. And I don't know if this legislation is considering that. And Rachel May has been that voice, and so is Tim Kennedy and Neil Breslin, and I hope to join them. And there are power in numbers. We need somebody in the majority. If it wasn't John Mannion and it was somebody else, I would, of course, as an independently minded person, look at both candidates. But that is a factor. A factor definitely is we need somebody in the majority to help form that legislation. And when those budget change, and they're going to quarterly as we go forward, we're not going to have anybody there. We need somebody there. But when the legislative session of 2021 comes, we need a strong representative, and we need one in the majority. And Rachel May is right next door, but for the 50th district, I hope to be that person.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's something that you really come up against more and more. Oh, there you go. You're getting it straight. Blue steel over here.
There we go. Okay. There we go.
It's something you come up against a lot when you're, on the council. How many laws are made with downstate in mind. And it's just a, it's a reality. When we go canvassing and you go knocking doors, a lot of times you'll go where the people are densest. It's always harder to get out to the rural areas where you got to walk a mile and a half between houses in order to knock a door. And that same thing is true politically for New York State. You've got this, it's like a seesaw where all the all the people are on one side. So it's a natural dynamic that, a lot of time the legislation in New York State is made for with downstate in mind. So it's great. It's a great thing that you're mentioning the unity of the upstate Senate and those senators working together to try to, represent upstate. So if we can talk about, Jared again had this question about, you and I were talking before we started the stream, Jerry Grant's book, Hope and Despair, about the, regional governance. So like in Onondaga County and Syracuse, we had the kind of conversation about consolidation, which seemed there was no political appetite for from both the city and the county. It was pretty much assumed as dead on arrival. But particularly in your field for education, we've seen in North Carolina where they moved to a regional government, a more countywide government. They were able to see cost savings. They were able to see more equity across the district because, where we have the issues now in New York State where the poorer areas have less tax revenue for their school districts. Their school districts statewide get underfunded as well. Regional government could perhaps ease some of those. So what are your thoughts about that in relation to education and
Right.
both the perils and the advantages?
Sure. I think, first of all, if we just talk about education, I'm familiar with that philosophy and that book. And, I have to say that we have issues of inequity in education, and dropping a pin at the center of a region and drawing lines out from that and creating these districts, I think philosophically is a great idea, because I do think that would contribute to eliminating some of the inequity. That being said, people are pretty fraternal. They really like their school district. They really like going to basketball games. They really like the colors that they wear. And I do think it would be a bold move, but a challenging move, a difficult move. I know what it's like out there to just try to consolidate police departments or merge a village into a town. There's great resistance to that because people love their area, and we're not, I don't mean to pick on some random place, but we're not Chesapeake, Virginia. We're not a brand new, relatively new community. Most of us have been here a long time. We have families that have been here a long time. And the people that come in typically sort of love the area that they come into too, and immediately are hopefully brought into that community. So, I mean, it's a time in a what are going to be difficult budgets moving forward, where I think we have to keep everything on the table. I don't think that's going to happen in education in the short term, but I certainly do think that because of the inequities that are out there in education, that a bold plan like that might be necessary. When it comes to a governmental level, again, I do think one thing would be, we like to have our government leaders as close to us as possible. And if we move to a regional one, I think that causes a little bit of a problem and a little bit of a disconnect. Being a Central New Yorker, I do think people really enjoy their community. I think they're proud of their community, and town boards, good or bad, at least they're closely connected to their constituents, and it's easy to go to a town meeting and voice your concern or watch it on a live stream. That being said, I think there's room for consolidation in certain places. I know there's been some resistance to it, but I do think when it comes to cost savings, both the county and the city, if I'm talking about Onondaga County right now, agree that there's places where we can make some improvements. Again, many years ago, I watched the debate, and I think we came out of it as a draw, that there's positives to the consolidation and there's negatives to it. It's going to be a trade-off either way. Again, it might be a time for bold moves like that, and I'm open to the debate of a regional government, but also, I would rely on information and metrics from people who are really in the know on if that's a good move or not. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? We're obviously right now we're dealing in, probably one of the most unprecedented situations that we've had in a century with the coronavirus and the COVID situation. What are your feelings? What stands out to you about the political landscape about COVID and Corona? What are your feelings about how we've been coping at the city level, at the county level, the state, the federal. What are your thoughts about how our government's reacted so far? My friend Jared, I had a coffee with him earlier today, and he was saying, this is kind of it, as critical as everyone is on government and bureaucracy. It's really what's keeping the wheels on the wagon at the moment. Without some kind of cohesive plan or imaging or messaging that we need as a society, I think we're in a rough bout. So what are your feelings about this coronavirus, this COVID, and about the new landscape? What are you noticing? What sticks out to you, and what are your feelings about the response from government thus far?
Sure, it's a great question, and I don't want to take up the rest of our time here, but I will say that I am a biology teacher. I've been a biology teacher for 27 years, and we had a midterm exam session that ended, and the day that those students came back was February 3rd, and we had already heard about the coronavirus and how it had started to spread. I can't help it. I have a mind that is drawn to that. I tried to get as much information about it, and I already had a lot of background information on it. I will say this, and again, I don't want to take up too much time. It is very frustrating sometimes to hear people speak about the science of viruses and human immunity when they don't know what they're talking about. It is important to have people with a scientific background in legislatures, excuse me. I know that your wife is a biologist, and I taught viruses that day. I told my students there is a likeliness that we are going to separate from each other because I understood the data as it compares to other viruses. I understood how lethal it was. I understood how contagious it was. I'm 51 years old. I've watched the scary things on the Discovery Channel that talk about global pandemics. I've watched all those. As a biology teacher, I've seen H1N1 and swine flu and things like that come and go. I knew this was a little bit different, and it is not the flu. It's more contagious, and it's definitely more lethal. And are we talking about a mortality rate of 2 to 3%? We are. But, I had to spell that out for my students that we're talking about if we're in a building here of 1,600 kids, and fortunately it's not impacting, although, I'm sure people in tune to some of the recent news stories, that it's not affecting that young population. But regardless, we have staff of an advanced age. We have students and staff that have compromised health conditions or compromised immune systems. They, we're talking at 2%, and we're talking about a large number of people that are very close that we see each day that wouldn't be with us. And that's what's scary. I don't envy the elected leaders locally or at the state level or at the national level. They have very difficult decisions to make. And honestly, I because of my background, I was a voice to say, we need to close sooner. But you know what? It's hard to react to things that you can't see. And I do think that once the decision was made, that we've done a good job. I will say that at the county level, County Executive McMahon, I'm paying attention to this as a pseudo politician, as somebody who's running for office. And when it seemed like people were trying to drag him into a fight with the governor, he resisted that. It seemed like when the protesters were outside saying reopen, you're not true to your party, he resisted that. I give him a lot of credit for that. It's not easy to do that, and he has difficult decisions to make. I think from the state level, the governor has done an excellent job as a calming voice. His comment about reimagining education could be taken a couple of different ways, and it certainly perked my ears up for sure because we had been down that road in the past. But you know what? These aren't easy decisions. I do think that our response locally and at the state level has been a good one. What I do know about this virus also and the tests is that this is kind of a scary thing because we do not have the tests out there or the reliability of those tests. People are hurting. I talk to small business owners almost every day. I talk to large business owners on some days, and it is a reality. It is a balance that somehow we have to get through. And to be honest, Joe, we're not going to get through it perfectly because more people are going to get sick. And unfortunately, more people are going to die. What we have done, I think, a good job of is what we heard about 2 months ago, which is flattening the curve so that our healthcare institutions can handle this. And they have. They have done that. They have been able to care for the people that show up at their door to the best ability, to the best of their abilities. And we could be in a much worse place right now than we are. We do have to look back and we do have to look forward. And I don't envy them. I know they have a challenging job, and they shouldn't have to deal with the political rhetoric or the finger pointing or the blaming that has happened to a degree. But I think locally and at the state level, they've resisted that very well, and I commend them for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur with all that. And an interesting thing that I heard from someone was that I was messaging with the mayor and with the county executive when they were trying to, when they were making the call about whether to cancel school or not. And we actually Onondaga County did, as much as we wish we would have stopped, pulled back sooner. We did pull back before other places in the region, and the number of cases you can see from what I've been told, this is by a friend of mine, obviously this isn't my data, but a friend of mine who was familiar with the data said you could see the measurable decrease in cases in Onondaga County as a direct result of that, of that action. So I agree with you. I think it's, listen, if I was the governor right now, this is an incredibly challenging time. I think you got a lose-lose situation where if you, keep the economy closed, you have small businesses suffering, losing their dreams, losing their livelihood. If you open, you have people yelling at you that you're not protecting human life. I know there's a lot of people that think it's never a good time to reopen and they don't want to reopen, period. And that's a really challenging line to walk. And so I do think that, a lot of people are, angry on both sides, but I think it's a tough line to walk. So to that adjusting to coronavirus, what's it been like trying to campaign, trying to get the word out there, trying to, the number one thing that, a candidate knows is that hand-to-hand, that handshake, that door knock, that personal interaction is the, I believe the data shows that that's the most compelling way to interact. When you go to a small town, you talk to people and have that interaction, that they say that that's like the most concrete way to impact the voters. And we've had that taken away from us. So what have you been doing in this, how have you been coping and adapting to what's been going on?
Sure. I will answer that. Thank you for the question also. But one thing, as you were commenting, Joe, one thing I do want to say is, we do have to be good citizens in this and follow rules, right? And it, masks might be an infringement on people's lives and things like that. But sort of these are people I respect that I see on social media who have a brazen attitude, it's one thing to maybe not comply, but it's another one to spread sort of anti-science out there. That's tough for me to hear. And I know you join me in getting people to be, respectful of other people's opinions, but hopefully comply. As far as my election goes, one fortunate thing for me was I was going to some of my supporters, volunteers, campaign staff early on and saying, I know this is our plan, but I don't know if we're going to be able to carry it out. And, I watched sort of them go through the stages towards acceptance of that. And I was hopeful too. I think I was hopeful because I watched these people make phone calls. They arranged canvases. They were getting people, recruiting volunteers to go door to door. They put everything they had into it for me for a long time. And then as that started to change over time, we realized this is just something we can't do. And what's great is the people that are out there that are willing to do it, that were upset that they couldn't do it for me, that's kind of what keeps you going. But we've of course shifted over the course of the last couple months. And not just have we shifted what we do because we can't go door to door. What we're shifting to is making phone calls, trying to inform people about the absentee process, checking in on people. I will tell you a quick story. You know, my wife was one of those people making those calls. And you know, Joe, you've run for office, so you know this. You want to connect with people. You want to let them know that you're in it for them, and you hopefully got their vote. Time is of the essence. You go make the next call, right? Well, I'm not really built like that too much. I don't think you're really built like that either. My wife's definitely not built like that. So she had some calls where she talked to people. One of them, a 90-year-old woman, people who had lost their grandchildren to COVID-19, and it was, they talked to my wife like it was such a blessing that she called at that time. You know, we had a list of services to help people, but really, I think in this process, more people are picking up the phone because they are disconnected from their typical social lives.
Right.
That they're willing to talk to telemarketers at this point. They're willing to talk to politicians. But the bottom line is that my wife had a wonderful conversation that probably lasted for 40 minutes with one woman who needed to talk to somebody at that point. And so, yeah, we've shifted, and we didn't just shift to move towards phone calls. The finish line has been shifted twice too. You know, I mean, we were in a dead sprint to April 28th.
Right.
And then, you know, my track and field days are over, Joe. I don't know about you, but anyway, we were sprinting, and then it's going to be June 23rd, and it's probably going to be by absentee only. And we have to make those adjustments. We have to pay attention to the executive actions. We slowed down a little. We started to transform. And then, you know, I understand the decision. I did talk to people at the Board of Elections and talked about just the elimination of my election locally, the how that impacted the ability of them to be able to conduct the elections that they're going to, because I'm a special election, but I'm for the general populace, which means that creates an exponential complexity to it. Do I think we need a representative in Albany right now? I do. But do I understand the decision? I do also. You know, so now after a couple sprints, we're back to a jog. We're a little under 6 months away from an election. We've made those adjustments, and I think we have things in place where if things open up and I can go to somebody's door, we're ready to do that. And if not, we have a comprehensive plan to reach people via social media, via text, and via phone calls, and everybody's favorite, you know, yard signs, Joe. So we'll have those out there.
Yard signs, baby.
Yeah.
Well, my friend Jared also, I'll go back to one of his questions. He was saying that education is a foundation of a good economy and good economic growth. So a couple of, just kind of a multifaceted question here. What's your feelings about the role that education plays connection into an economy, and what skill sets do you feel, for me, it's really funny as a musician, and I ran my own label and I did a lot of my own stuff. There was a lot more than just playing and singing. A lot of it was, my own promotion and stuff like that. A lot of the skill sets that I had as a musician, I feel have totally translated. I don't feel like my career has changed all that much. Like we used to go around and talk to people in environments and get to know them and make these human connections and try to express yourself and be, concise and eloquent in your words. And a lot of the skill sets have remained the same. What do you feel? What do you feel the role of education is in the economic growth? And what skill sets do you feel from education you're going to be taking to the state Senate if you do win in November?
Absolutely. So your first question, as far as education's role, I fortunately have been exposed to a situation at West Genesee where they invested it's got to be close to 15 years now in a high-tech lab that takes things from, computer-aided design all the way to production. There's lathes, there's mills, and that's at West Genesee. Okay, we all, I think, understand that the traditional trades, we do not have people to fill those traditional trades, and the traditional trades leads to the innovative trades. In going around and talking to people, there's 1,500 jobs out there in central New York that we can't find local people to fill.
Yep.
We have got to be able to make those connections because we have the highest rates of poverty and minority concentrated poverty. And those numbers should be, and I believe are, embarrassing to us. We can do this. You know, I have, not that all poverty is in the city of Syracuse, but the city schools, the 5 high schools in the city, they all have unique technology programs. And I've talked to people who are part of those programs, and there are great successes there. We have to continue that. We got to connect to local industry and say, here are the jobs that you need. How can our school districts make sure that we have highly skilled people that are going to stay in Central New York and work in those jobs, because they're our community members and we want them there, and help provide a pathway out of poverty. Myself, as somebody who lives and breathes education, we can do that. I mean, I know we can do it. If we can't do it entirely, we can do it better. And I do think that those connections are there to be made, so that we have workforce development programs to make sure those kids get out and they have a job, and a rewarding job, because we know they're out there, and we know that our kids have talents, and we're not tapping into those because, as you probably agree, Joe, we had this, unfortunately, drive for kids to go to college, set the bar high, get them to college, and you know, that was short-sighted, and here we are. As far as your other question goes, I'm going to quote Frank McCourt here, who's a teacher and an author, and you know, he said you walk through the door on Monday morning and you got 27 critics there. You better be on your game. You better be ready. You better be prepared. You better be efficient, like you said, concise, which I haven't been tonight, in your words. Okay. And you better be adaptable. You better be ready for anything. And, you know, teachers have to have that. If you don't have it, you don't stay in the profession. And, you know, at the end of those 27 critics, they leave and they bring in a fresh batch of them for another 42 minutes. So I also, from a science background, I think I apply like scientific thought to things, logical thought, applying data to it, applying background information, and then forming a hypothesis and thinking about what's the cause and effect. You know, from a leadership role as a teacher, I have to negotiate contracts. I have to maintain relationships, but I also have to be frank when things need to be said. And I think that I've done that enough to know that when I get to the legislature and I have to deal with other senators or people in the other house or different, you know, commissions that are out there, or the governor, that I think I can present things in a certain way and let people know this is what Central New York needs. I'm a representative of Central New York that I think is, you know, I said representative, but I mean a representative one. I think I represent Central New York well as somebody who's lived here my whole life, who understands what the good and the bad is of Central New York and the challenges that we face. So I have no problem facing that criticism and dealing with it, understanding that it's business, not making it into some political fight and then moving on. And I know this, that being in a classroom, although for people that aren't there might think, you know, I don't know how that forges those skills. It absolutely does. I think I'm efficient in what I do. I have a multitude of jobs, meaning I'm a representative of 400 teachers. I am a teacher. I'm a dad. I ran for office. And when I ran for office in 2018, I did not have the time or the luxury to just run. I worked. I was in a classroom, and I hope my students would agree, if you talk to them or their parents, that when I was in that classroom, they were my priority.
Right.
And the members of the teacher association that I represented, they were my priority. And, you know, then on nights and weekends, I had an important job, and that was to run as hard as I could and learn as much as I could, because I had never run before, for a seat that is a pretty big seat and a very important seat. And I take that very seriously. And the phone calls that I make now are to talk to people to say, what help do you need? How has this crisis impacted you? And we can all look at it from the outside, but it's amazing, Joe, how many things I've learned that I would not have known if I didn't make a call to somebody who, you know, represents distillers in New York, or somebody who doesn't own a construction company, or a massage therapy office. and I've learned those things, and it's amazing that I feel like I'm more prepared because I have the time to do that now. So I mean, I appreciate the question. I'm a fan of teachers. We come with a certain personality set and a certain skill set that makes us usually pretty good at what we do. Most of us are not activists. We are nurturers. But of those out there that are strong advocates for education, I don't think they miss their calling because they still have it for the kids, but they also know I'm willing to speak up and put my own, reputation or whatever it might be at risk to make sure that people know that this is important. I'm speaking up and you need to hear it. And, in a classroom, some of that happens. Managing 27 personalities isn't easy, but you make connections with those kids. They respect you, and the gains that you make are only the result of those connections. Content doesn't matter. Have it being the most, diverse in style teacher doesn't matter. It's really those people-to-people connections. And, I hope to continue that in Albany, and I hope to do it in an ethical and positive manner because we absolutely need it.
We do need it, John. That's great. So I guess, we're trying to keep it roughly around an hour. So we're coming down to the last few questions, but I guess one thing I would ask you is, when I ran for office, some of the things that motivated me to run for office, a big one was, lead poisoning, which is something that I've made kind of my main focus when I was running for office and since I've gotten to office. And there were a few other issues that were big ticket items that I was like, this upsets me. This is why I want to run for office. And this is an initiative I'll undertake once I get into office. So if you had to give your elevator pitch or to people out there, what initiatives would, Senator John Mannion make a priority when he got into office? What can people expect out of you, when you hit the ground running? What issues are you going to tackle, and what do you want to make your wheelhouse and your priorities when you get into office?
Well, if I narrow it down to 4, I think I've talked about 3 of them already, and I'm not going to belabor those. But one is ethics in government for sure, and I've already talked about that. But the ethics part does involve faith in government, and we do not, in my opinion, we don't have the faith in our leaders that we once had, and part of that, and I have a politician, I can't remember exactly who said it, but he said, the greatest threat to democracy is not communism or is not debt. What it really is the fact that we cannot decipher from our leaders when they are telling the truth and when they are not. And therefore, it creates a chaotic situation where we don't know if we're being told the truth or not. So what we've done is we've pushed ourselves to our side. We've said who's on my team, and they're on my team, and I can trust them. So that's something that's important to me. It's not an easy fix. I think it's a long journey, but we have to restore it because right now we've got leaders making decisions, and I think we have too large of a population that are thinking it's political. And at this time, I do think as the mayor, the county executive, the governor have all made have had a difficult time and have made the decisions and made the statements and shared the information to the extent that they could. And I think they're doing a pretty good job. So that's important to me. Education is going to be important, especially in our high needs areas, school districts that have students that are in high poverty areas. We've got to break that cycle of poverty. And, it's not just writing a check, but it is making sure that we get excellent educators in programs that lead to success, that lead to a pathway out of poverty, so that there can be, and I'm going to use the word hope for these kids. I've already talked about economic development. We have to make sure that we create a climate or maintain a climate where people can be competitive and keep the people here. I want my kids to grow up here. I grew up here and I stayed. I want my kids to stay here. A lot of my friends, I got out of college in 1990. A lot of my friends went away. They never came back. The ones that did come back came back because they love it here, because it's a special place, because those connections I talked about, they just don't happen in every, strip mall across this country. They happen genuinely here. But the last one I will say that I haven't mentioned is I'm a biology teacher. So I think I have a sound understanding at the molecular and cellular level of our environment and how it works. And when it comes to economic development, and we're going through a time where we have to apply the science of the day to make these very difficult decisions about restarting our economy, we have to apply science to it. There are algal blooms in our lakes.
Yeah.
And we can talk about the short-term fixes to those, but property values and the money that comes from those top property values in the form of property taxes and tourism dollars, you can't hold summer camps, youth camps on lakes, or people don't want to rent properties and stay there. People don't want to shop in those shops. Forget all that. That's all important. You don't have clean drinking water, you've got nothing. The game's over. We have tremendous resources here in Central New York. We have more fresh, accessible, clean water than almost anywhere else in the world. That is something we have to maintain. And as somebody who understands the biology of the environment, I want to make sure that I'm there. I think there is opportunity in getting through this crisis to go, if we are going to go through something like a New Deal, you can call it a Green New Deal, whatever you want to call it, we need to jumpstart our economy. And as we do it, when there are projects, like we have that project that's out, in Clay, we've got to go, what can we do to infuse green technology in this? Because, and Joe, you can wrap it up on this if you want to, I've taught those kids that are your age. I'm 51. I've taught for 27 years. I'm teaching kids right now that are 16 years old, but I've taught kids that are 43 years old now. And this, I want a civilization or a society here where it's a good place to grow up. It's a clean place to grow up. And we do have high rates of things in this area. Like we talked about taxes in New York State before, we are a product of our success. People came here, industry came here. None of us would be here if we didn't have, the salt water coming out of the ground and the Erie Canal dug. Then the industries came, and yes, pollution occurred. It did. And now we got to be on top of that. We live in an area where we have concentrated toxins over the course of generations. You need people in office who understand how those impact, organisms or cells and the whole ecosystem. And I hope to be that. I didn't talk a lot tonight until the end about the environment, but environment and science should be embedded in every decision that we make. And we're watching right now that when we don't apply science to decision making, it puts us in a much worse position. I understand the metrics that are in place to start the phases of reopening. That being said, data is being applied to it. And, I think we're all hopeful that that goes well, that we don't have to go back to a previous phase. But I am happy that I think the experts are talking, the local leaders and the state leaders are listening. And as a result, they're going to make the best decisions, and they're difficult decisions, but they're applying science, and that's absolutely necessary and always has to be the case.
Absolutely. Let me see if we have any comments in the any questions in the comments, if you don't mind me looking through from.
Sure.
Any way to end gerrymandering?
Well, I'm going to apply the word hope again. So in New York State, we do have what is I will avoid the quotes here, but an independent commission at the state level when the census occurs, and I encourage everybody to make sure they complete their census forms if they haven't already. It's very important, but at the end of that census, there will be a redrawing of the legislative lines, and it will be an independent commission. There are there'll be 5 Democrats on the commission, 5 Republicans. They independently draw those lines. It goes before the legislature and it's voted upon. So I think everybody is hopeful that that will lead to a more independent decision making that occurs. Not to get into the weeds of this, but let's say the legislature votes that down. There's a redraw. They vote on it again. There's another redraw. They voted on it again. I'm not sure what happens at that point, but that is a step in the right direction. Locally in Onondaga County, there is a push for an independent commission for that redraw in 2021. We are running out of time in many sense. I know we're sitting here in the middle of May, but before you know it, it will be time to redraw those lines, and hopefully legislation will get through to make sure that it is a purely independent commission that draws the lines in Onondaga County, and I'm supportive of that. I think people are ready to take the politics out of it. I think people more than ever before in the past generation are paying attention to exactly what's happening in their local and state legislatures. I think they're more knowledgeable about it, and I think they demand that the politics be taken away from it.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree with you more. There's one of my favorite authors. I don't know if you ever read Guns, Germs, and Steel, Jared Diamond, and he wrote another book called Collapse about Easter Island and other societies that have faced societal collapses, and he has attributed to some of the stuff we've been talking about tonight a lack of faith in government, and particularly gerrymandering as one of the potential things to watch out for in our societal health. Because if people lose faith that that the game is rigged always before they even start playing, it makes it really hard to have those that buy-in and that faith that like right now is I think a lot of where we're seeing success with the crisis is where people have faith and trust in their governments. I talked to my friend who lives in Taiwan, and he saw my post about taking down the basketball hoops and taking down the soccer goals here in Syracuse, and he's like, and here they're just telling people to stay home. People stay home because they see they think it's a problem. The government says wear a mask and stay home, and people do it because they there's a lot bigger trust. And I think gerrymandering is a big part of that. So, John, well, I think there's a couple. Maybe one last, we'll just do one last question. We'll wrap it up. What are your thoughts? There's one question here about getting kids back into school. And there's a question here about when will we end the wearing masks and stuff like that, with the governor's order. And, I know you're a biologist, you're a biology teacher, and my wife's a biology teacher. So I get this, this is a conversation. I think, we play Nintendo most evenings, and we sit there and we talk about what's going on while we're playing Nintendo. And, she's always telling me that, like you have, that we have to watch the data, and that, that we're not on our, it's as much as we like to see everything go back to normal as quickly as possible. What's your thoughts about the reopening, and any predictions on when this is going to end, or any thoughts about how we get out of this, this economic crisis?
Right. Yeah. It's a big picture. There's no easy fixes. I will say that, and Syracuse.com, to go back a little bit, I mean, I credit them for eliminating their comment section. I think that in a world of very divisive, and I think also, a very small percentage of the population that was fanning the flames of some really negative stuff. I'm glad to see that's gone. But Syracuse.com did mention today, it's hard to believe, but this happens to be the deadliest week of this crisis for Onondaga County. That being said, you would think as a science teacher, I might take the position that everything should be a hard stop right now. But I do think how this virus has progressed and the timing of the people that were health compromised and negatively impacted, it's not surprising, I think, that has happened. So just looking at that bit of data, you should say, absolutely not. We can't open. We can't do any of this. That being said, I do think that people have a greater understanding of, if they're going to go out, that when they go out, they should carry on safe practices. I see people around me that are not, and I care about my family. I care about, what used to be, even before we broke away, the students that I teach. And, I'm not shaking hands, and I'm keeping my mask on. The more there is intentional, I will say, misinformation out there, that is destructive, and it's going to prolong this. And I wish I had an answer to those questions, but I will say this: in the short term, and by the short term, I mean this month, a month from today, people should be following the directives of their leaders, who I think are making good decisions, which is to maintain social distance, that if you're sick, stay home. If you're sick, don't go to work, to wear a mask and be careful of what you're doing. That's at least a month. I mean, for me, that's a no-brainer. When will it be over? I do think, knowing what I know about the biology of things, vaccines, people are like, we need a vaccine. Vaccine testing and vaccine production is not a fast process. If you were paying attention during SARS or MERS, those conversations were occurring. But I do think that not just to open up, but for people to have faith and comfort, all people, or most people, to be able to go out and feel comfortable in shaking people's hands and talking to each other in close proximity. I don't think that happens until there is a well-tested and easily available vaccine that is, proven to provide immunity for people. And that's not a simple thing. So I commend the elected leaders who have very difficult decisions to make. And like I said many times in this interview, I think they've done a pretty good job of maintaining that balance. And they're also, we see the unemployment numbers. I see the unemployment numbers. I understand the chain reaction that occurs with a lack of tax revenue, that there's more people out there that need more support. I understand what's happening to the unemployment fund that's out there, and what's happening to municipalities who need to keep police, firefighters, teachers, and other employees out there. It's going to be a challenge, and they have hard decisions to make. But in the short term, yes, we're very likely going to move into phase one here. I encourage employers to be smart about it, to have their employees' best interest at heart while they try to survive. It's a difficult challenge. The good thing is that we, and I hear it from our elected officials, that we are Central New Yorkers, which means that we do know each other, because a lot of us have been here a long time, and you just don't cast people aside. We've got to try to support everybody in the way that we can. And we do need federal funding to come into these municipalities, because they're hurting. So it's a great question. It's not a simple answer. My answer was a long one, but I will say in the short term, we got to be smart.
Yeah, good. Well, John, with that, I think we'll try to keep these around an hour. It's been a little over an hour now. And I just want to say I appreciate you so much for taking the time. I know you're busy with everything going on, and thanks for coming on and chatting with me. And if you wanted to say before we go, let people know where they can go to look up more for you if they want to do a lot of times, like you were saying, people can do digital phone banks now. People can donate. What's the website? What's the Facebook? How do people find you if they want to get involved with the campaign?
Sure. Thank you, Joe. And people have been asking how they can help. So the website is mannionforstatesenate.com, spelled correctly, Mannion, Mannion, and then 4 is FOR, State Senate. Facebook is John Mannion for State Senate. Twitter is Mannion for 50, as is Instagram. And, if people are interested, and we've done virtual house parties where people have had great questions. I'm used to the Zoom meetings or other platforms to do this, and it's necessary to do. And I'm out there every day on the phones talking to people, because I did this last time. I seek. My wife says, "Knowledge crowns those who seek her." I have a great job. I love my job. I'm not ready to leave my job, but I feel compelled to do more in my life. I hope to leave this place better than what it was before. And I want to hear from people. In a platform like this, Joe, I know we're about ready to wrap up, but I hope I see this in in our elected leaders, a difference from what we saw a generation ago, is that they have to be so careful about what they say, because somebody's going to take a little piece of it and spin it and make them out to be unreasonable or uncaring or disconnected or whatever it is. And you know what? I hope we get away from that. And I appreciate you doing something like this, because it gives us an opportunity to have long, extended conversations, you know. And if people are willing to pick those apart and find something that they can use for their own devices, you know, I hope it fails for them, to be honest. And that's not just about me. That's about any situation like this. When you interview Pam Hunter or you interview any other leader that's out there, you know, I appreciate you doing this. And those are the ways to find me. And I'm willing to engage in any way that people would wish to. That'd be great.
Great. That's great, John. And, you know, I'm sure everybody appreciates that. So folks at home, if you want to reach out to engage with John, you know, do digital house parties. Normally when we're candidates, we try to encourage people to, you know, throw house parties of 20 people where we come in and we talk to all the people and tell them what we're about and have that kind of face-to-face interaction. Those aren't possible right now, but, you know, if you want to reach out and do some Zooms and get John to sit and chat with you for a while, that's a possibility as well. So reach out, MannionForStateSenate.com and John Mannion for State Senate on Facebook, and Mannion for 50 on Twitter and IG. Get involved, folks. And thank you, John, for coming. I'm wishing you all the best, brother.
Thank you, Joe. It was a lot of fun. I hope to be back here again.
Yeah, man. All right.
I won't fix my hair the next time.
No, it was good. We had a little.
Okay. I got it back. I got it back.
A little blue steel movement. I like it.
Okay. I'll look up what that is.
Zoolander, buddy. Zoolander.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Got it. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Take care, John.
Great meeting with you, man.
You too, buddy. Bye.